David, we've all become accustomed to Crusaders being a team that wins Irish Cups, that qualifies for Europe's, and has even won the Gibson Cup within the last decade. But it's not going so well for them at the moment under Declan Cadell. They're 11th in the league, and they've just been knocked out of the Bet McLean Cup by Glentoran. How do you assess their season so far? Because it's been a really tricky start to the year for the Hatchetmen.
I think, Keith, to be totally fair, we've got to put Crusaders' season thus far into context, and by doing so we've got to start at last season. And I looked at the number of senior players that they had unavailable to them, and when it came to the end of the season, I wonder, would they be retained or would they be allowed to leave the club? And it was quite obvious that there was a recalibration with regards to budget. That monies that might have been there previously weren't there at that time, and it was about affordability and about just sustainability. And there was, quite a number of experienced, professionals left the club. Adam Leckie, Billy Joe Burns, Paul Heatley he had retired and then you come back out of retirement. But there's a number of players, you go through them. You players who had contributed massively to Crusaders' unbelievable run. And you even go back then to the beginning of the Stephen Baxter era, where Stephen basically brought the club through a very difficult period and got them back into the Premiership, and then built year on year by way of European qualification and various other forms of income being found by the club. But they've hit a point in time where they're having to rely on a lot of younger players. And that smacks of me of affordability. That in terms of the monies that they might have had previously, it isn't there. So how do they spend what they have? And they're very much looking at young players who they're hoping will be hungry to progress and to develop and all of that. They still have a sprinkling of senior players there, who you would hope would be able to be kept fit. Unfortunately, there's several of them haven't been available. Robbie Weir, being one pivotal player. So you see where Crusaders are at, and they've had a difficult time. I've actually watched Crusaders 3 times this year, maybe four times actually, and there's been parts of those games where they've been more than decent. They've passed the ball well. They've worked hard. Their attitude, application has been good. But it's just that Irish League know-how, Keith, and they've got into this downward spiral, which is so difficult to break out of. I'll personalise it. I'll go back to the 2018-2019 season when Brian McLaughlin and I were managing Ballymena United. We had an incredible season. Absolutely incredible. We pushed Linfield all the way, and we got second, qualified for Europe, and it was a remarkable run. I mean, we were so close to being league champions. As I say, principle is different, but the context is the same. Ballymena then that following season went on a dreadful run. Player unavailability, we actually retained quite a number of the squad, put them on improved contracts, but through injury, loss of form, confidence maybe being at a minimum on occasions. Other than cup competitions, we were, in the league, we were really struggling. And I remember, I think it was St Patrick's Day, and Ballymena United were away to Warren Point, and that was the first game that was postponed. Your first Ballymena game, but that was the first date of postponements due to COVID. And I've got to say, I almost sort of breathed a sigh of relief, because I thought I honestly couldn't see how we were going to get out of the situation we're in. We were working as hard as we possibly could. We were doing extra bits of work. We were redoubling our efforts in terms of match preparations. Team talks were through the roof, and yet nothing ever seemed to go right for us. Refereeing decisions, individual errors, which obviously just drains the confidence from players and from the team. So, Crusaders find themselves in a very difficult situation. The one thing I'll say is that the league has been so topsy-turvy and everyone seems to be beating everybody else. Like, it's frightening when you look at the bottom half of the table, and it's only a number of points that separate. And, if you get a win or a couple of wins, you suddenly fly up. My attention was drawn this week to the Glenavon Swifts, who, played 14 and now up to 21 points. And yet it was the first five, Keith.
Yeah.
They were chinned in. So
it can change very quickly, I think, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
With Ballymena, your team back then, you got in that sort of death spiral where you just got, and that feels like Crusaders are in that at the moment. They've lost the last three.
I'm hoping that will not be the case, and trying to sit back, taking any emotion out of it, given where we are at this moment in time in the season. There is an awful lot of football to be played, and some of the results that we've had thus far have been so topsy-turvy, and that particularly down in that bottom six. For me, the hope is that there is ability there is talent there. When I've watched Crusaders, some of the football that they've played have been first class, but they just need to get that little rub of the green. They need something to go for them. They need that little injection of confidence. They need something just to encourage them, and as does Declan Cadell, who's come in for me. Who was ever wanting to take on the mantle of Stephen Baxter? What Stephen did was absolutely incredible, unbelievable. But people have got to realise that there was that end of an era, and circumstances are different. And Declan has gone in and very bravely gone about his business. And I'm hoping that something happens, not just for the players, but for him, to give him that encouragement. So the hope is that we're only 13, 14 games in. There's loads of ability in terms of those younger players. Hopefully the senior players that are there will come back sooner rather than later. And if that's the case, then they could be all right. But there's no doubt there's a battle for Crusaders at the moment.
Is there any hope for Glenavon? When Michael O'Connor came in at first, they got a little bit of a new manager bounce, but that seems to have fizzled out. And last night they were knocked out of the Bet McLean Cup by Newry City. Congratulations to Newry, and also congratulations to Moyola, who put out Dungannon Swifts. Big shocks. But for Glenavon, is there any way out of this?
I think, Keith, it would be wrong to say at this point in the season that they're doomed, they're gone, and there's no hope. But there's no doubt they are facing an absolute mountain to climb. It's like two Mount Everests. For me, if Glenavon do retain their Premiership status, it probably will be the biggest escape act in Irish League football. And apart from performances, from players, you need that wee bit of good fortune, And I listened, in part to their game against Coleraine last week. Now, their run of fixtures have been an absolute nightmare. I think they play Larne this weekend. Last weekend they had their goalkeeper, sent off. It was because of the way the substitutions have been made. They couldn't even bring, the other goalkeeper on. I think Harry Murphy had to go into goals. So if anything, Keith, is going against Glenavon at this moment in time, it's that lack of good fortune. It's that just things not going for them. So it is tough. Mightily tough. As I say, there was that Michael did get that bounce initially, quite rightly. He will point to the fact that they've only played 12 games. There's other teams have played 13 and 14, so there's that little bit of leverage there. But again, they need something to go for them. And you're wondering, they've had Coleraine and now they've got Larne this weekend. I watched Larne against Ballymena United on just on Saturday past. I've got to say that Larne's first 40 minutes was the best 40 minutes I've seen from any team, and I've watched Glentoran, watched Coleraine, watched Linfield. That top four, Larne were absolutely immense for that period. So, and I'm saying that because Glenavon played them this weekend, and I can't really see Gary Haven or Larne taking their pedal off the gas. They will want to make sure that they get full points, and they don't want to hiccup because they see themselves very much in this Premiership challenge. So for Glenavon, I'm not saying they're doomed. I'm not saying that they've gone, but what I'm saying, it will need to be Herculean effort and a footballing miracle for them to retain their Premiership status, and they need a piece of good fortune sooner rather than later.
Glenavon are big diffs. Are most likely to be automatically relegated. That 11th spot in that promotion relegation playoff still very much up for grabs. Crusaders are the team in it at the moment. Can you see anybody else getting hooked into it? Bangor are doing really well. Carrick had a good start to the season, then faded a little bit. Portadown are not that far above Crusaders. Ballymena have had some difficult results as well recently.
Do you know, Keith, I promise you that I'm not sitting on the fence because the league has been so topsy-turvy, and I point, to Dungannon Swifts being the best example. At the start of the season, everyone was talking about their 5-match, run without anything. And they've turned it around now. Rodney McAree, outstanding manager stroke coach. Dixie Robson there in support of him. They've got quality players. We've constantly said that would only be a matter of time. So they probably have bucked the trend, so to speak. But the other teams that you've mentioned all have had phenomenal results, but have also had experience, difficulties. To me, I wouldn't even want to begin to try and guess it, and I'm not sitting on the fence. For example, you mentioned Portadown, who started well, had a difficult period, then they go and beat Linfield. Absolutely outstanding. I was working at the Portadown Glentoran game last Friday night. Glentoran, you couldn't say that they didn't deserve to win, but in saying that, if Portadown had got a draw, then you couldn't say that Portadown didn't deserve a point, because on the night I thought they played fantastically well. And if I go back to Glentoran's first goal, the pitch had a massive impact on that. I know people will say, well, maybe the ball should have been cleared, but the pitch impacted, on that penalty decision. And ultimately, I wonder that if Glentoran hadn't got the penalty, would they have broken down a very resolute Portadown defence, who were passing and playing and moving and doing tremendously well. So, Ballymena, you look where their start of the season and some of the frustrations they have had, and yet they beat Linfield at their place. You're looking at the teams and players have been able to raise their game on any particular given day. So, much too early even to begin to second guess, where Glenavon are at, where Crusaders are at. They're in the middle of an awful run, and you talk about that spiral. So they really need something to happen for them. The other teams, I haven't got an absolute notion.